Hey guys, Squatcher Loading here. We are back at single stage loading. So in our last video, we got all of our cartridges sized. We got them primed on the press. We did all of our quality checks, making sure our primers were in good shape. They were sub-flush. There was no deformities or anything, so we know these are all good. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to get our powder measure set, throwing the charge that I want. I'm not going to get into load details or nothing like that. That's all. You guys need to figure that stuff out through your load manuals and where you want to start, how you do that. What I want to show you is how to go about the process of making good ammunition on a single stage press. So after we get our powder measure set, we're going to expand all of these. We're going to drop powder in them. And then after that, we're going to seat the bullet and crimp. And I'm going to show you each step in setting those dies up and a quick overview on this particular powder measure and then how to use the beam scale. So stick around and let's get started. Alright guys, so I've went ahead and I've dumped my powder in my powder measure. I'm leaving the cap off for the moment, but the first thing we want to do is what we call uniforming the powder measure. And what that's doing is we're going to give it some taps, just like this. We don't have to get crazy, but what we're trying to accomplish is getting that powder to settle down into the powder measure and fill the cavity that's going to actually measure out the charge. So the reason we do this again is as we're working the lever on our powder measure, it's going to start to settle. And that will cause inconsistencies out of the gate as we're running our first batch of charges. So we want to go ahead and uniform it and get it out of the way. And the first thing I do before I even check a charge is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 5 drops. And I'm going to put them all in the same, I think that's 5 there. And then I'm going to dump them back in. So that's just kind of unifying again and then clearing out the cavity where the powder goes. So the next step is we're going to get our baseline charge, and I've already pretty much got this dialed in, but I'm going to show you real quick how it's supposed to look on your beam scale. Okay guys, this is a typical scale that you're going to get. They all pretty much work the same. You usually have an adjustment wheel or some way to adjust 0, and from the angle that you guys may see it, it is on 0, and that was by adjusting the up or down on the left hand side here. Now you have a large poise and a small poise. On your large poise, this one goes up to 500 grains, and each one of these grains, or I'm sorry, each one of these marks from 0, I'm going to zoom in here so you can see. So every one of these additional marks here are in the units of 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and so on until you get to 50, all the way to 500. Now on the right side, we have the small poise. And these are all in 1/10 of a grain. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on until we get to 1. So let's take, for example, your charge weight. Let's say it's 4.2. So we would go ahead and stabilize here. We would move this small weight. So there's 4 grains, 4.1 and 4.2. If we were doing, say 8 grains, we would move this large weight over 5 because we only got 5 grains on our small poise. So we would move over 1. That would give us 5 plus 3. That would give us 8 grains. So ideally what would happen is once we put our charge in here, that should read 0. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set for my charge, and then I'm going to show you what it should look like when you dump your charge onto the scale. Alright, so I'm going to take my charge that we ran earlier, and I'm going to try to gently set this down on the platen there, and we're just going to let it go. And that's my desired charge weight, and I'm getting a 0 on my large poise here, and it doesn't maybe show up perfect from the angle you're on, but it's at 0. So I know that my powder measure is throwing the desired charge that I'm looking for. Alright, back to our powder measure real quick. Now that we're happy with the charge we have, I'm going to go ahead and place the cap on here. And for some reason, if you need to make an adjustment, and on this particular powder measure here, to increase the charge, we would turn it counterclockwise like so. We would actually be lengthening the shaft that's protruding, and what that would do, it would increase the size of the cavity to allow more powder to enter into it. Now to decrease the charge, we'd go the opposite direction, and that would decrease the size of the cavity, decreasing the charge weight essentially. Once you have it adjusted where you want it, you're going to go ahead and lock it down. And one other thing I want to note is most of these are going to have different adapters on the bottom. And what you want to do is choose the adapter that is as large as you can get, where the cartridge doesn't slide inside the hole. That way it runs smoother. A lot of times, like if you forget this and you're running, say, 223, you're going to spill powder everywhere. So make sure you get the right adapter in there, and just be mindful that most of them are plastic, especially in some of your entry-level kits. So you don't want to go crazy and tightening that down with a pair of pliers or anything. Now the other thing I wanted to show is when you're using the powder measure, it's as consistent as you are. So you want to make sure every time you throw a charge, it's a nice up and down motion. You don't have to slam it, but you want to make sure that you're doing it with some authority, and that'll yield you your best results as far as being consistent, just like so. And if you guys have more questions on powder measures, I can definitely do another video. You could dedicate a lot of time to how to establish a good charge on these and how they're consistent and how to make them better. But for this video, we're just going to show how we're using it. Alright guys, now we're going to set up our expander die, and what this is going to do is this is going to open the cartridge mouth up so we can get our bullet inside. So we're going to want to make sure we get enough flare, and in our case we're using cast bullets, so we're going to have a little bit more flare so we don't get any case bulging or anything like that. But the first thing I always do is I'm going to back this lock ring all the way up, and I'm going to back the seating stem out. So that's the first thing we're going to do, and then we're going to go ahead and get a few threads on the die. And we're going to bring the ram up with the same shell holder, and we're going to run it down till it touches the shell holder. And I'm going to go ahead and put my cam over into it, just like so. And then I'm going to just snug this up a little bit by hand, and then we're going to need to grab a cartridge and start setting our bell so we can do our bullet insertion. So I'm going to grab a cartridge and I'll bring you right back. Alright, so we're going to take a cartridge, we're going to stick it in our shell holder, run it up into our die, make sure we lock out, and then I'm going to just turn this until I feel it engage the cartridge, and it'll get kind of tight. It's got some friction to overcome, and then I'm going to back it out, and I don't have any movement on the flare at all. So I'm going to go ahead and do about a quarter of a turn to a half, and then I'm going to run it back up and see if I start getting any flare. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of flare, and a good rule of thumb to start off with is at least shoot for about 12 thousandths of a flare diameter, and I'm going to show you real quick how I check that. Alright, so I got my calipers here, they're zeroed, and I got my cartridge. So to see if I have 12 thousandths, or at least getting there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take my calipers, and I'm going to zero them out on the case. Once I get them zeroed out, I'm going to check my bell diameter. And you can see I'm about 6.5 right there, 6.5 thousandths. So we're about halfway there, and like I said, 12 thousandths is where I go to get a good starting point on my seating bell. Alright, so we know we have more flare adjustment to make, so I went ahead and put the cartridge back in the shell holder. I'm going to make about a quarter turn again. I'm going to run it up into the die, and then we're going to check and see where we're at. We're shooting for, to get started, about 12 thousandths. So we're at 12.5 right now. So I'm going to take one of our bullets and just kind of see how it sits down inside. And it stands up on its own. I know I like to run this a little bit bigger with cast projectiles, so I'm going to give it a little bit more. And what I'm looking for is I want to see a little bit of gap. I don't know if you guys can see this well or not. I want to see a little bit of gap around that so I know I'm not going to shave off any powder coat or anything. And to check and see where I'm at, I'm about 13.5, 14 thousandths. So I'm going to call that good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my cartridge back up into my die, and this is the time I'm going to go ahead and button up my lock ring. Make sure I go ahead and tighten up on my seating stem. And on these retting dies, they make a tool from Sinclair. You don't need them. You can use a pair of pliers or channel locks or something, but so that's all set up. So now we know we're good. So now what we're going to do is work on getting these all flared and then get our powder charge in. Okay, so how I do this is, since we already have one that we've got our flare on, I went in and taken it out of my load block. So we've already got it flared. I'm going to go ahead and throw my charge. And every time I throw a charge, I look. So I'm going to work through this load block. We're going to put it up into the press, do our expansion, bring it over, do our charge, put it in our load block. So I'm just going to repeat this process until we get our load block filled. And then I'll shoot you around and show you how we do our inspections on powder. So all these have been sized. We've done our powder drop in each one. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this opportunity, and like I showed you guys earlier about how I flip upside down, right side up between each process, and the way I do this is so that I end with my powder facing up in my expansion, so I can easily go down through each one and make sure that the charges, one, look consistent. You're not going to see a couple tenths of a grain, but you will see a double charge if it doesn't spill out, and you will see a mischarge. So we want to make sure that we go through each cartridge. This is very important that you do that, and this is where you want to spend most of your time on inspection because this is where mishaps occur. Alright, so now we're going to get our seating die set up. Keep in mind, this die does not have a seating feature. It's not a combo seat and crimp die. So we're going to treat it just like any other die in this set. We're going to go ahead and back our lock ring out. We're going to thread it in, and we're going to go ahead and set the same cam over. That way we get a good consistent seat of the bullet. So I got it touching the shell holder. I'm going to back the ram up a little bit, about a quarter of a turn. I'm getting good lock over. So I'm going to go ahead and just hand snug this lock ring. I'm going to go ahead and take one of our dummy cartridges that we had earlier. I'm going to load it in there. I'm going to grab a projectile, and we're going to go ahead, make sure our seating stem's backed out, and we're going to put it up into the die. Make sure we lock out, and now we're going to thread this down until we feel some engagement. I got some engagement, so I'm going to back a little bit and just give it a little turn, and we're going to see where our bullet's at. Obviously, that's too long, so we got quite a ways to go. So I'm going to give it a good turn, and we're going to repeat this process over and over until we get the desired seating depth and case overall length. So I'm going to get this wrapped up, and we'll jump back into it. Alright, I think I got my length that I'm looking for. I'm going to confirm it with a measurement, and yep, it's where I want it. So now I'm going to put this back into the die, or I'm sorry, back into the shell holder, run it up into the die, and this is when I'm going to go ahead and lock down my seating stem. Again, pair of channel locks, pliers, but I'm going to use this Sinclair tool to button it up. So now we got to do is seat all these bullets. Alright, so now we're working from our load block. We're going to put our charged case in, put our bullet in by hand, and then just run it up in the die, making sure that we cam over on each one so we get a good consistent case overall length. Try your best to get it centered up in the die. So I'm going to work on these, and then we'll come back and show you where we're at. Alright guys, so we worked through this entire load block. We've got all of these seated to the right overall length that we're looking for. So now all that's left is to apply the crimp, and we're going to do that now. Alright, so we're going to set up the crimp, and this is probably one of the most overthunk, biggest mistakes that most guys make when setting this die up. For starters, we're not going to come over the press on this die. We actually need to set this up with a cartridge inside that we have seated already. So we're going to stick a bullet in, a completed cartridge minus the crimp. We're going to run it up in the ram, and this is how I set this die up. I'm going to thread it in until I start to feel it engage on the flare. Okay, so I am engaged on the flare right there. So at this point, I'm just going to back the ram out a little bit. I'm going to give it an eighth, quarter of a turn, and I'm going to start checking to see if my flare is removed. Now, most of your load manual, it's going to give you a diameter here at the very end. Let me show you here. You're going to get a diameter in your load book right here, and that's a good idea. Like on your 9mm, it's 380, so I always shoot for 377, 378. And on these ones, we're looking for 423-ish. So we're not quite there, so I'm going to give it just a little bit, because when it comes to putting your crimp on, guys, less is definitely more. A lot of mistakes made by over crimping. You can get into all kinds of trouble. You can overpressure. You can start shaving off plating or jacketing. But it doesn't take much. All you're wanting to do is take the flare out of the cartridge or out of the brass so that you get good feed and you get a good neck tension around that bullet, and we are set. So now that I have it set, I'm going to run it back up in the die, and it's always a good idea to tighten your dies up with whatever process that you're doing. In this case, the crimp. That way we get good engagement into the die. It's centered up into the throat of the press, in that we're centered up on our lock ring in those big threads. Those are pretty coarse, so we want to make sure we get everything centered up perfect, so we're good. So now all we got to do is go ahead and get the crimp on the rest of these. One thing I'm going to do real quick, we're going to double check it in the case gauge, make sure it drops in, which it does. Very nice. So let's get these finished up. And instead of putting these back in the load block, I'm going to run these into a separate bin here so that I make sure that they all get crimped. Alright guys, so in these two videos we accomplished showing you how you can reload your own ammunition on a single stage press. And again, that's what I suggest to most of you who are getting into reloading, because the single stage press accomplishes a lot of things. One, it makes great ammunition. Two, you're going back and forth and you're setting up the dies for each particular step. So you get very good at setting up dies very quickly. So in this video, we made 50 rounds total between the two videos. So if you guys have any questions or where to start, or if I didn't cover something that maybe you were looking to get covered, drop me an email at squatchreloading@gmail.com. Catch our videos here. Also, check me out over on the Reloaders Network. That's where all of my videos are as well, and also Gunstreamer. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Squatch Reloading. And if you like what you see, please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel. We're doing all kinds of different things. I think next we're going to get into some of the Squatch method on case prep. So until next time, guys, God bless.